Welcome to the Logistics Point interviews. I'm joined by John Lash from E2Open, who is the Group Vice President of Strategy. And we're going to talk about something which is extremely important in the industry and everywhere at the moment, social responsibility, logistics, and supply chain. John, thank you very much for joining me. What is the role of logistics companies when it comes to social responsibility, and why have we started to put so much focus on?
It covers everything from the forced labor aspects of the supply chain and dealing with sanctioned parties, the carbon emissions, for example, and the climate risks that are associated. If you think of logistics from an emissions perspective, it's roughly 15% of global emissions, right? That's around 8 gigatons of carbon dioxide, which is, a considerable amount. And when you start looking at what the financial implications of that are, there's something called the social cost of carbon. In the US, the EPA has marked that at $190 per ton of carbon dioxide. So that 8 gigatons is roughly $1.5 trillion in social economic costs. And that's every single year. And that's just for transportation. Logistics has a very big role to go and play in there. And everyone has a role to go and play.
Is it easy for us to summarize and say, overall, this is how far the industry as a whole has reached to become more socially responsible?
Yeah, I think we're still pretty early on in the journey. A lot of companies have their net zero commitment targets and goals. The challenge is, how do you go and meet those? What are the different areas that you're focusing in on? It's looking across the entire value chain, and that is it's challenged because a lot of the focus traditionally has been on what's going on within your own operations, and you've got to go and extend out upstream and downstream across all those value chain partners. And it's inherently a multi-enterprise problem. So it's challenging. It's a hard nut to crack for folks, right? And is wrapping around that. The first step with a lot of these programs is to go and measure and report. But that's not good enough. You've got to go to the next step, which is, how do you actually reduce those liabilities and what your footprint is? And so it's really important to integrate these kind of capabilities within the day-to-day tools that you use to run your business. And if you don't, then it's just an overlay, and it sits over top of things and it reports it, but that doesn't give you the ability to make decisions, or at the time of decision, to choose one path over another to help go and reduce.
How do we even plan to execute something which is so complex, and then to bring all of these different parties together to make it actually work? And what directions and what suggestions would you give managers and companies in general when everyone is having to do this?
Encompass this within your day-to-day core activities. That's the key way of doing it. You can't do this as an overlay. You can't just think of this as an afterthought and say, oh, now we should be doing social responsibility. No, it doesn't work that way. You've got to integrate it within your core piece. Think collaboratively. Think about your value chain. Think about creating shared value with the partners. It can't just be that I need you to do this so that I can benefit. Where are those areas where both parties can benefit, your tier ones and your tier twos and the shippers as well? How do you go and benefit across the board and create that shared value? I don't think the right approach is to say we're going to create a social responsibility product, or a product called, we don't have a product called E2Open Carbon. We're not going to, right? It's integrating this in all of the activities you're doing to make, move, and sell, and think across that value chain. And that's the way that you can not only start accurately reporting emissions are, for example, if we're looking at carbon, but then take a step to actually reduce that. And it's that combination that will allow you to get to your net zero goal.
How can the smaller, medium-sized companies that usually supply services or products to the larger organizations do it if this is complex and maybe they don't have the money and they don't have the staff and the knowledge? What can they?
You don't need perfection right away. The important thing is to get started, begin that journey. So do what you can, for example. And a good example of that is if you're looking at emissions, doing a life cycle assessment and using that as a beginning. Now, life cycle assessments are industry averages. So it's not really your end goal, which is a product carbon footprint. That's where you really want to get to. But at the beginning, start with an LCA or life cycle assessment to use that. And it's the beginning of getting a figure which is representative, and it gets you in the right ballpark. But it doesn't allow you to go all the way and get your final and add granularity along the way. And that's a really important step, because if you're waiting for perfection to get started, you'll never get out of the gate. You have to go one step at a time. So look for an area that is important for you or for your clients, and then start engaging on that one, and then over time increase the degree of granularity that you have there, so that you're getting more towards the end state that you'd really like to get. Groups like Patagonia, for example, they're a shining star of what's possible, and have been way ahead of the curve. But you don't need to be a Patagonia to participate in. These are the kinds of practices for the challenges that we're addressing. Some of these things are, for example, with UFLPA and the German due diligence law. And then later on, next year, the Europeans are going to come out with the EU Due Diligence Act, or that's anticipated. Automotive, for example, considering some of the things like the EU battery directive. So it's a digital battery passport, where you've got to have a digital battery passport in place by 2016 if you'd like to go and sell a car there. So looking at those kind of activities, and who are some of the leaders in the automotive industry that are doing that, how are they wrapping all that together? That's a good place to get inspiration.
How important then is the role of government and authorities in all of these, and how closely should companies look into what governments are proposing?
Regulations are going to be driving certain changes across the board. So we always have to be aware of what those regulations are. And there are regulations that are happening on both sides of the Atlantic, with the EU and the US getting active in this game. So keep an eye on what those are. Carbon, you've got your CBAM in Europe, creating a level playing field for imports of certain commodities. In California, you have a law that is being enacted that is requiring some Scope 3 reporting. It's important to keep aware of those. I think any company that's got a net zero program has an awareness already of these, and they're a step ahead. Mm-hmm. So it's important to stay abreast of what those regulations are, because those are things that everyone is going to have to comply with. But the approach of putting in place a net zero program, you're already at 2 steps ahead. By doing that and acting on it.
Well, John, thank you very much. As usual, people can learn more about things that we have worked before with E2Open, but also on the social responsibility topic in the description below. Thank you very much.